I was about 2 days into a solo loop through the Seneca Rocks National Recreation Area in West Virginia. I've done many solo hikes over the years, using the trips as a way to decompress from life, to be alone with my thoughts. Trust me, Seneca Rocks, with its jagged cliffs and deep woods, always held a kind of pull for me. There's something about that rugged terrain, the sheer sense of isolation, the quiet that wraps around you like a heavy wool blanket. If you've never been, imagine narrow trails threading through dense hardwood forests, moss-covered stones, the kind of place where you can go hours, days, without seeing another soul. And that's exactly what I was after. I had gone off the main loop that morning, following an old trail I'd found on a topographic map from the 80s. Just me, my pack, and Lori, my 6-year-old shepherd lab mix, who had more sense in the woods than most people I know. Lori had been my hiking partner since she was a pup. Loyal, smart, and calm. She always trotted ahead of me, checking the trail and occasionally pausing to make sure I was still behind her. Her ears were perked, but her tail was relaxed. My pack was heavy, but balanced: tent, sleeping pad, food, stove, water filter, field journal, and my camping knife. That knife, it was more than gear. It was a fixed-blade bushcraft model with a full tang, a walnut handle my dad had carved himself, and a blade spine worn smooth from years of use. He gave it to me when I turned 17, and it had come with me on every trip since. There was even a little chip at the base of the handle. That knife was part of me. I clipped it to my belt, like always. Around midday, I found a spot that looked like something out of a dream. A clearing just off the trail, filtered light falling in golden shafts through the canopy. Lori flopped over onto her side and chewed lazily on a stick. I dropped my pack, unclipped her leash, and let the silence sink in. I boiled some water, made a pouch of rehydrated trail risotto. It was bland, but warm, and took out my journal to sketch the clearing. Everything felt grounded, peaceful. I remember feeling lucky, like I'd found the exact moment I was searching for. After a while, I noticed the burner had gone out. The valve was a little off, so I reached down, unclipped my knife, and used the spine to nudge it back into place. It hissed slightly, then clicked shut. I remember laying the knife down beside me, blade flat, handle out right on the tarp I'd spread out. I even heard the clink as it touched a rock beneath the pine needles. That moment is etched in my memory, crystal clear. I cleaned up, packed the burner, brushed Lori behind her ears, then reached for the knife. It wasn't there. At first, I figured it had rolled under the tarp. I checked, then under the log, under my pack. I crawled on my hands and knees, brushing aside leaves and moss, digging into the dirt with my fingers. Nothing. I laughed, half nervously. "All right, funny forest trick," I muttered. "Where'd you hide it?" 15 minutes passed. I checked my belt again, my pockets, even unrolled my tarp in case it had somehow gotten caught in the folds. Still, nothing. My knife, my dad's knife, was just gone. Not misplaced. Vanished. There was nothing but undisturbed pine needles and soft dirt. I don't know how to describe it, but it felt like a trick, not a prank, but something more deliberate. Like I was being tested. I finally gave up. I had close to 8 miles to cover before nightfall, and I couldn't afford to spend another hour crawling around on my belly. I told myself it would turn up in my gear, maybe lodged in some pocket I hadn't checked. I stood up, dusted off my hands, and clipped Lori's leash back on. But I couldn't shake the unease. It followed me like a shadow as we pushed on toward the upper ridges. The trail past the clearing got steeper, more switchbacks, more overgrowth. I don't know how else to say it. The woods didn't feel the same. Lori, usually the bold explorer, walked closer to me now. Her body was tense. I tried to talk myself out of it, but the feeling didn't go away. I reached the bluff I had marked on the map, a flat outcropping of rock about 50 feet above the river, with dense forest on 3 sides. But as I dropped my pack and looked around, I couldn't relax. I was wound tight. The silence was too complete. I went through the motions. Top, tent, fire ring, dinner. Lori curled up next to the tent and gnawed on a pine cone, but she kept glancing at the trees. I forced myself to eat, but the chili stuck in my throat. I kept looking toward the edge of camp. Nothing moved. Nothing sounded. When darkness came, I was wrapped in blackness. I sat with my back to a log, staring into the trees. And then I heard it, just after midnight. A shuffle. Not loud, just a dry whisper across pine needles, just beyond the light. Lori went rigid. Her ears tilted forward, and she stared hard toward the edge of camp. I didn't move. I waited, but nothing followed. I didn't unzip the tent. Didn't call out. Just lay there. Eventually, I drifted into a shallow, twitchy sleep. When I woke at dawn, Lori was sitting stiff, staring at the fire ring. I followed her gaze, and my blood ran cold. There, on the largest stone in the ring, placed with care, was my knife. It was spotless. The blade was clean. No dirt. I stepped barefoot from the tent. I knelt by the stone, reached out slowly, and picked up the knife. It was cold. Too cold. I didn't think. I packed. Tent half folded. Stove barely cooled. We moved fast. Down the bluff, onto the trail. I covered in hours what had taken me days to hike in. My legs burned, but I didn't care. Lori stayed tight by my side, her breathing short. We made it back to the gravel parking lot just before dusk. When I got home, I put the knife in a shoebox and shoved it to the back of the closet.
I haven't touched it since.
And once you understand that the woods are watching you, you never quite walk the same again. It was the fall of 2011. My uncle had invited me and my 2 cousins on an RV trip through the more remote areas of western North Carolina. We'd planned a few nights of relaxed camping through the Blue Ridge backwoods. We spent the first few days marveling at the rustic charm of old trails and fog-kissed mountainsides. Most of our stops were uneventful, small RV parks, quiet campgrounds near Boone, Spruce Pine, and Linville. Our last day, we decided to try something different. We were driving toward the remote Pisgah National Forest, far past the usual trailheads, where cell phone signals faded and the trees grew thicker, older, somehow heavier. We weren't following any mapped-out trail anymore. My uncle, ex-Marine, who preferred instinct over GPS, was convinced there'd be a scenic, isolated overlook where we could camp for the night. Nothing beats the places no one else dares to find, he said. The road turned to gravel, then dirt, and by dusk, we hadn't seen another car in hours. We eventually pulled over near a narrow clearing where the trees pulled back just enough to reveal a strip of night sky. Stars spilled across it like scattered ice, impossibly clear. We just started setting up for the night when headlights pierced the dark behind us. A rusted pickup rolled slowly toward our RV. We all turned. Out stepped a man tall, probably in his 60s, with a long, tangled gray beard. He introduced himself as Joe and said he was Cherokee, a local who knew the land better than anyone. He didn't look directly at any of us for more than a second, which made it hard to tell what he was really thinking. He asked what we were doing so far out. My uncle, Ever, the friendly type, explained our adventure. Joe nodded, almost like he expected it. Then he said, "You're in the wrong spot if you want the real views. I know a path. Not on any map. Locals only, but it's worth it. You'll never forget it." He offered to take us there. My stomach had already started churning with something beyond nerves. But my uncle was already taken in by the guy's old-world charm and apparent expertise. My cousins, being younger and more adventurous, were all for it. We grabbed our boots, flashlights, and followed him. We left the RV locked and dark, parked just off that nameless forest road. Joe led us past the trees and into what looked like an animal trail, barely visible in the dark. The path was steep, uneven, winding around massive boulders and through narrow cracks in rock. Joe didn't use a flashlight. He moved like he knew every root and stone, never stumbling, never hesitating. We huffed to keep up. As we went deeper, the forest began to feel wrong. It wasn't just the darkness. It was the absence of noise. Joe kept talking as we walked, telling us strange little stories. Old legends about spirits in the trees, about people who disappeared and were never found again. After nearly an hour, we reached a large flat stone outcropping. Joe waved his arm grandly. "There," he said. "Best view in the state." But when we looked, all we saw was blackness. My uncle, clearly tired, told Joe we were heading back. Joe nodded slowly. "Sure," he said, "but the shortcut's this way." He pointed toward a different path that vanished into a dense thicket. "Just wait here. I'll go ahead and clear it out," he added, then vanished into the brush. 10 minutes passed, then more. The darkness grew heavier, the silence deeper. We called out, first quietly, then louder. No response. My uncle decided to follow the direction Joe had gone. My cousins and I stayed close, barely able to see. We found no trail, no footprints. Joe had simply vanished. That's when panic began to set in. We were somewhere in the North Carolina wilderness, off any known trail, led there by a stranger who had disappeared into the dark. My younger cousin started crying. My uncle cursed under his breath, then told us to head back the way we came. But we were disoriented. The forest looked unfamiliar. Every ridge looked the same. We tried retracing our steps, but the terrain seemed different, unfamiliar, like it had shifted behind us. We stumbled over roots, slipped on loose rock. At one point, we were forced to crawl along a ledge no wider than 2 feet. Oh my God, my cousin almost fell. I remember grabbing her jacket and pulling her back. We kept moving, praying we'd recognize something. Hours passed, and then we saw it, the wide, flat rock. Somehow, we'd looped back, but at least it was something familiar. From there, my uncle managed to find a recognizable cavern we'd passed earlier. Slowly, painfully, we made our way back up. We saw our RV, because Joe's truck was gone. As we got closer, I noticed the RV's door was slightly ajar. I had locked it. I was certain. My uncle flung it open. The interior was wrecked. Our bags were torn open, clothes scattered, food ransacked, electronics, wallets, jewelry gone. Joe had lured us away. He'd planned it. He was never a friendly local. We barely spoke. My uncle drove us back toward Asheville the moment the sky lightened. We found a ranger station and filed a report, but nothing ever came of it. We never got any of our stuff back. Joe, or whoever he really was gone. I still think about that night more than I want to. I wonder if it was just a robbery, or if he had other plans that didn't quite pan out. I had always found solitude in the silence of the mountains. That's why I planned a solo backpacking trip deep into the remote stretches of wilderness just north of the Appalachian chain. This wasn't one of those scenic parkway stops or manicured trailheads with mile markers and guideposts. This was the kind of wilderness where your phone becomes useless. I started out early that morning from the last ranger station. I signed the logbook, shouldered my pack, and stepped off the gravel path into a canopy so thick it felt like entering another world. My goal was a ridgeline that stretched above a deep valley rumored to have untouched views of mist-choked hollows and towering rock bluffs. It would be 2 days in, 1 day at camp, and 2 out. 5 days alone. 5 days of peace. The first day was uneventful. By evening, I made camp in a small glade and spent the night under a ceiling of stars, the chirp of crickets soothing me to sleep. It wasn't until the second morning, about 8 miles in, that I saw him. I was rounding a steep bend where the trail all but disappeared into thickets of rhododendron when I heard footfalls behind me. I turned, half expecting a deer, maybe a ranger, but it was a man. Mid-30s, maybe, lean build, wiry strength. He wore an old hiking jacket and boots caked with dried mud. Just a water bottle slung over one shoulder. "Beautiful morning," he said, falling into step beside me like we were old friends. I nodded. "Yeah, it is. Didn't think anyone else would be this deep out." "Oh, I love it out here," he said. "Farther you get from civilization, the better it feels, right?" He was performing friendliness rather than feeling it. I offered a non-committal laugh and kept walking. He matched my pace without asking. "You planning to camp near the ridge?" he asked, his eyes never quite meeting mine. "Something like that," I said. I didn't like the question. "I used to come out here all the time," he went on. "But after a while, it gets boring. Predictable. You know, you do this long enough, and nothing really scares you anymore. Nothing really excites you." I said nothing. My instincts prickled. He continued anyway. "Sometimes I think the only real thrill left is not knowing what's around the next bend. The unexpected stuff. The encounters." We walked in silence for another few minutes. I pretended to check my map. "Think I'm gonna stop here for lunch," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "Appreciate the company." He grinned again, teeth too white. "Suit yourself. Maybe I'll see you up the trail." He lingered for a moment, just long enough to make me uncomfortable, then turned and walked on, disappearing into the foliage ahead without a sound, but just gone. I waited 20 minutes before I started moving again. When I did, I stepped off the main trail, bushwhacking through thick brush and doubling back, anything to put distance between us. I didn't set camp until dusk, deep off trail behind a tangle of boulders and deadfall. I didn't sleep well. When dawn broke, I packed up and changed my route. No longer heading to the ridge, I angled southwest toward an old fire road I'd seen on the topo map. It would add another day, but I wanted out. Something about that man gnawed at me. For the next 2 days, I saw no one, but I felt watched. There was no proof, no items disturbed at my campsites. It wasn't fear in the traditional sense. It was that deeper fear, the kind that rides under your skin and sits in your gut like ice. On the final night, I made camp near a fast-moving stream. I didn't build a fire, just crawled into my bag, too tired and too scared to do much else. Around midnight, I woke up in a cold sweat. There was a noise, a slow pacing just beyond the trees. I held my breath. Crunch. Pause. Then something, I swear, circled me. The steps were too slow, like crunch. "Who's there?" I croaked out. I swear, just after my voice, complete silence. I froze. My blood turned to stone. It was surely him. I fumbled for my flashlight and shone it toward the noise. But nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The pacing didn't return after that, but I knew he was out there, watching. But the man never touched me. He never threatened me. At first light, I packed up and hiked harder than I ever have in my life. Just moving. When I reached the fire road, it was still 12 miles to the ranger station. I made it by nightfall, dehydrated, limping, and ragged. The clerk barely recognized me from 5 days prior. I asked if anyone else had signed the book. I swear, no one had come in or out since me. That was 3 years ago. I haven't been back since. I still hike, but never alone, and never off the grid. It's been 2 years since it happened. I was 20 at the time, a junior in college, and enrolled in an outdoor leadership program that culminated in a 3-day solo survival assignment. We were allowed to bring only the bare essentials: a backpack, an empty canteen, sleeping bag, knife, 6 waterproof matches, rope, a sheet of plastic, extra socks and a change of clothes, halazone tablets for purifying water, and a small pot with a spoon. No food, no tent, no phone. The instructors made it clear we were to be completely self-reliant. They would drop us off in staggered locations across a remote section of the Smokies and return after 3 days. We were to place a fluorescent flag on a tree near our drop point so they could locate us upon return. When I stepped out of the transport van that cool May morning, I felt excited more than anything. My drop point was nearly 7 miles from base camp, up a narrow foot trail that veered off from the main hiking route into the heart of the forest. It had rained lightly the night before, so the leaves were damp and the air smelled of earth and moss and something sweetly decaying. I waved to the instructor, then turned and hiked in. I walked for maybe 45 minutes before I found a spot I liked: a gentle slope between 2 ridges, not too exposed, not too crowded with brush. There was a downed tree I could sit on, and a shallow trench I could line with the plastic for sleeping. I had practiced this kind of setup before in training, and I felt confident. I got my little camp together, gathered some firewood, and spent the first night warm, fed on wild greens and boiled cattail roots, and surprisingly content. I even found a small muddy stream about 400 yards east of my site and was able to collect water after letting the sediment settle. The halazone tablets helped, though the water still tasted like pond scum, but at least I wasn't thirsty. The second day was uneventful, too. I journaled a bit, though I had to ration paper and ink and spent time identifying birds and edible plants. It was peaceful, honestly. A little too peaceful. By the second night, that strange quiet of the forest, when you realize you are the only human for miles, began to feel more lonely than liberating. I had never slept alone in the woods before that way. I thought I had prepared myself mentally for the isolation, but I hadn't. I missed voices. I missed footsteps on hardwood floors. I missed light switches. But still, I managed. The third day my last, and I knew I had only a few more hours before my pickup. Around noon, I began to break camp. I folded the plastic sheet, doused my fire, packed my gear, and shouldered my backpack. It was about a 45-minute hike back to the flag tree where they dropped me off. I got there a bit early, around 1 p.m. in the afternoon. I expected the pickup vehicle to arrive between 2 to 3. The trail leading to the drop-off was narrow and unpaved, just wide enough for a 4x4. I settled against a tree and waited. That's when I heard it. A vehicle engine in the distance, at first faint, then steadily growing louder. I stood up quickly, brushing off my pants, assuming it was my instructor. But when the vehicle came into view, my stomach sank. It wasn't the school van. It wasn't even a park ranger's vehicle. It was an old, dusty blue pickup truck. It pulled up slowly, tires crunching over gravel and brush. My pulse jumped. The driver was a man I didn't recognize. He looked to be in his late 40s or early 50s, with a gaunt, weathered face and deep lines around his eyes and mouth. He wore a camo jacket, and his eyes were partially hidden beneath the shadow of a worn-out ball cap. I froze. Something deep inside me, some ancient survival instinct, lit up like a flare. He rolled his window down. "You out here alone?" he asked. I don't know how I found the composure, but I smiled politely and shook my head. "Nope," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'm waiting for my friends. They're packing up behind me. Should be here any second." He didn't blink. He just looked at me for a long beat, then nodded slowly, like he didn't believe me. Then he put the truck in gear and drove off, disappearing around the bend in the trail. I stood there, paralyzed. The engine noise faded. I waited another few minutes. Then I snatched up my pack and bolted into the woods. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay by the trail. I cut through brush and undergrowth, heading uphill, deeper into the forest. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Oh my God. I swear I heard it again, the same engine. The truck. I lay flat behind the rock, barely breathing. I heard the vehicle pull up again. The door opened. Then I heard him calling out, "Hey, girl. You still here?" Leaves rustled. Brush snapped. I could hear him walking, looking for me. I don't know how long I stayed curled behind, fists clenched around the knife in my belt. My whole body was locked in terror. I was terrified he would find me. Eventually, I heard the footsteps stop. A long silence. Then the sound of the truck door slamming, the engine starting, and the vehicle slowly pulling away. I didn't move for at least another 20 minutes. When I finally got up, I hiked for hours. I didn't know if I'd find anyone. I didn't know if that man was still out there. Around 4 p.m., I stumbled onto a dirt road and, by sheer luck or divine grace, a forest ranger's vehicle happened to be driving along it. He must have seen the panic on my face before I even spoke because he stopped instantly. He asked if I was okay, and the moment I tried to answer, I explained everything who I was, what program I was part of, what had just happened. His face darkened. "You did the right thing," he said. "A young woman was assaulted out here about a week ago. Same general area. We've had law enforcement combing the region ever since." He helped me into his vehicle, and within an hour, I was back at base camp. Shaking, exhausted, still reeling. Later, I learned that another girl in my class, her name was Tara, had also had a creepy encounter the night before I did. She said a man approached her tent, asking strange questions and circling her camp. She blew her emergency whistle non-stop until help came. Whoever he was, he had been lurking in those woods for more than a few days. Oh my God, I've never forgotten the way his eyes looked through me in that isolation. I haven't been back into the Smokies since that trip.